Hello, my name is Betsy Miller-Kusch. I'm the gallery director at the SOMA Arts Gallery, part of the South of Market Cultural Center, located here in the South of Market area of San Francisco. We're continuing our program today, exploring the lives and times of the artists of San Francisco from the time period of 1960 to 1980. And this is in concurrence with a show that we have in our main gallery, the Re-Show, which is composed of about 100 artists from that time period, spanning the time from the Beatnik era to the Summer of Love. We have as our panelists today Flicka McGurran, Jack Davis, Brian McPartland, Jack Freeman, and John Bahana. Each of them was instrumental in art movements taking place during that time period, and in fact SOMA Arts itself came into being during that time and was very greatly directed by our late director Bernice Bing, who we especially want to remember. I'd like to start with Jack Davis talking a little bit about the ambiance of the South of Market, how the South of Market Cultural Center came to be. Then we'll talk, Brian can talk a little bit about 63 Bluxom Street. We had La Mamelle, we had Open Studios, we had Camera Works, we had Project One. There were numerous groups of artists who banded together during this time period. Jack?
Well, you know, I was listening to the first segment when the artists talk, and Nancy Frank was still here. Obviously a very vital time for all of us. I think seminal in the development of the South of Market was the Art Institute, which had a great student population, a great leadership, and did something that was really important for future development, which is that the Art Institute, like the Rebeat movement, incorporated artists of all colors into their curriculum. And for the first time, there was a questioning of the dominance of the white cultural institution in the San Francisco scene. That became very important, this cross-pollinization that happened. And the artists who were involved in that change, I think, embraced it greatly. A couple of other institutional things helped. One of which was the Art Commission, almost in spite of itself, because the Art Commission had the Neighborhood Arts Program, which reached out into the neighborhoods and communities in a way that had never happened before. And there was a very important man in the Art Commission staff, a man named Elio Benvenuti, who put together an annual festival once a year in Civic Center. And that was very important, I think, for this group of artists and all the artists in San Francisco, because it gave them a chance to show in this huge civic show that took place right in front of City Hall, and for 10 days, everybody's art was up. It also involved a lot of construction. And Elio went to a lot of these artists from the Art Institute and incorporated those artists in the construction staff. Those artists, of course, brought their friends around. After you'd finish a day's working, you'd have a beer together. And the community of artists that had come out of the Art Institute started mixing with other artists in the community. That soup pot that sort of happened in there found an area to go to in the South of Market. South of Market was an underutilized industrial area. The kind of productivity that had characterized the South of Market for years, with machine shops and motor winding shops and rebuilding shops, they were being phased out by a change in the economy. All of a sudden there were not only storefronts but warehouses that came up, abandoned buildings that came up. This group of artists turned around and looked at it, and I think in effect became the first developers of South of Market, if you want to look at it that way. Because they looked at all this space and they said, hey, you know, I don't need this, you know, anything fancy. I'll just go in here and I'll paint this wall white, and I'll put a fluorescent light up here, and I'll cut a window in the roof up here so I get my sunlight for my painting. And, you know, George and Mary are going to help me do that, and they'll get this space and I'll get that space. And all of a sudden they started moving in with a huge amount of enthusiasm, huge amounts of talent, and a limited knowledge of the building codes and procedures. And because this was an area that was virtually abandoned by the city, they didn't know what to do with it. It was a bunch of drunks and winos and empty warehouses. They didn't pay any attention. And so for years, the artists had almost free reign. And it was a wonderful situation, and of course, the city decided to help the artist, and they put together the live-work situation, which initially did help the artists deal with code problems at Project Artaud, Project 1, Project 2, places like that, but ultimately turned into the death of South of Market by providing a base for developers to get huge amounts of funds to redo SOMA. At any rate, you know, that's sort of the environmental issue. I look at it as an environmental issue. There was a good environment for art. There were the people who were ready to come into it, and they went for it. That environment now is seriously degraded, and it's very difficult for it to support an artist anymore. But during that period, all these wonderful places sprang up. 80 Bluxton Street, La Mamelle, and SOMARTS was one of those too. The city people had enough brains to invest in some places when property values were low. I think this building was bought for $85,000.
Wow.
Since then, we put, a fair amount of money into the development, probably almost $1 million incrementally since that time. But it sort of retains that character where artists from all over San Francisco can come in South of Market and do work and get support. My background is more in performance than in visual arts, but also in the development of facilities. The elements that I also remember of that period was that in addition to the visual arts, there was a great interaction with musicians. There was a great interaction with performance artists, some of whom came out of the Institute, like Jim Pomeroy is my favorite that comes to mind. An absolutely wonderful performer who stretched the bounds of what everybody was thinking about in terms of the theater.
Jack, we're looking at a photo of the SOMART's main gallery right now. Back in the olden days, this was a warehouse space, very rough, very raw. Some of the construction that Jack is talking about has happened as a result of code requirements, but this space was alternative in every sense of the word. As was Bluxton Street. Maybe Brian, you could talk a little bit about what did you find when you moved in?
Let me just say one thing before he starts. This building that we're looking at has lots of light. When the city bought this building, it was a direct current building. It had no alternating current.
All the big owners were D.C.
Right.
Same thing. Bluxton Street was D.C. when it got.
Yes.
Had this wonderful elevator that would throw out sparks and it would slap, 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 and creak, 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 creak. I once had 3 supervisors on it as an experimental ride. God, if it had broken down, I would have been done for.
But the city might have been better off.
No, it was Sue Bierman on there.
Oh no, that wouldn't have.
We had 2 of the first directors of Capricorn and Thunder here, John Amon and Ansel Wetterstein.
Yes.
They
well,
were.
Carlos Luark and I worked with John and Ansel doing the art festival, and Ernie Rivera did 30+ years ago.
Right.
I think we can't give enough credit to Elio Benvenuto for his inspiration.
And Sue Bierman also.
Yes.
Sue Bierman was the godmother of the Neighborhood Arts Program. It was cooked up at her breakfast table.
Right.
And
big reunion or a big session for her at Delancey Street on the 3rd, by the way.
Well, very important person in this.
Well, besides being alternative buildings, these were alternative spaces as far as the kinds of art that were shown here. John and Brian, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. We have a photo of one of Brian's paintings. I don't think it ever would have made it into a museum. Today it might have. Today it might have. In those days,
So nice.
No way. Yeah.
Well, that's a current work of mine that you're looking at right now. But the alternative galleries, some of them were truly alternative, and they rebelled against everything, including the people that we just mentioned, that like Elio. I mean, he was establishment, and he was looked upon as like a bureaucrat even. So,
No way.
yeah, I mean, yes, and just anybody with any authority or any position or title was looked upon as bureaucratic. And many of the alternative galleries, the people that ran them and their philosophy was just to rebel against everything. We heard from Nancy Frank, they wouldn't show a painting simply because a painting represented tradition, and they would have nothing to do with it. Bluxom Street, we were pretty wild and radical and rebelling against everything. We wanted to do it our own way, and we wanted no interference. And we were spurned on by some great individuals too, like Wally Hedrick in particular, who had in the 50s had started the Six Gallery, and others that Wally.
Mike Henderson.
Mike Henderson. Yes, Mike.
I was in the show, the Best in the West show at the Bluxom Street Gallery, and it was my absolute favorite show, I swear, in all the shows that I've been in. It was the best. It was such a great combination of artists from this area, artists from this time period that we're talking about. It was a fabulous show. How about having that show again?
Wouldn't that be great? And
Let's
everyone
schedule it.
in that show was
alternative.
contacted.
We can do it.
Or, you know, at least we tried to find them through the internet.
Well, I think we got a lot of them, but that show had a lot of strength, and it was a balance. I've always loved ethnically balanced shows and ethnically balanced situations, and that Bluxom Street show, Best in the West, was so well balanced.
I think that probably was the pinnacle show at Bluxom Street.
And we had the combination of people barbecuing every day out in front, and the fire department down the street, and saying, you know, you guys, that smells good.
We also had some great, friends of Bluxom Street shows that we usually had at, you know, Christmas time. And we'd invite everybody that ever showed there to come and show again. So many of the people in Best in the West came to the Friends of Bluxom show. Those were great events too. Good parties. Yeah.
Great
Rausch's
bands.
time.
I always remember Wally's band. It was so good. He was a really polished musician. One time I tried to get in the band to play my kazoo, and he threw me out. I was never so offended in my life. Because I knew all those traditional jazz tunes.
Was that when the jug band began?
No.
That was later.
Jug band began at Cafe Barbar at 22nd and Guerrero.
Which is
about
geographically out of the south of Market.
Yeah, well, that was supposed to be the Bohemian cigar store from North Beach transplanted into the Mission. And it wound up gathering its own clientele from the neighborhood, and somebody decided there ought to be a bluegrass band in San Francisco, which there wasn't at that time. And since I was from the Deep South, they said, well, you must know some bluegrass songs. Why don't you join in? What do you play? I said, well, spoons. So that was where I got involved in that. And then they used to play for my openings. And then they became a band that they'd hire here.
Yeah, they've been a fixture for years.
But they ended up at Cafe SOMA, that was their venue.
Well, after I got kicked out of Alvin, finally had to put a coat of paint on the place, and then we were without a home, and then when Paul let us play over there, and then we did a Barbara Boxer benefit, and well, we just did Golden Gate Democratic League barbecue.
You're the great hero.
Well, that's fun, you know. You see those guys walking around there. Oh, did I vote for you? No, I don't think so. And that's great.
Well, how do all of you feel that some of the art that we're seeing today grew out of that time period? When I look at the Reese show, it does not look old. It looks fresh. It looks exuberant. It looks living. And I have the sense that some of the movements that we're looking at today, in contrast, are not very living. I'd just like to talk a little bit about that part of it. Jack, how about you? You started out painting very sort of realistically, and then you graduated into a much more expressionistic vein, and then...
Well, I'd gone to Salzburg, Austria to study painting. And I was going to be an expatriate. And after I went to school there for a while and lived in London and Spain, I realized I was an American, and it was quite a realization that you know, I wasn't German or English or Italian. So I thought about coming to San Francisco, where there would be more of a melting pot kind of atmosphere. And I hadn't finished school, so I enrolled at the Art Institute. And that's a painting I did that's called Greed in the Mission. That was the beginning of the dot-com era. And a friend of mine that lived near Dover Hall got his rent raised from $500 a month to $2,000 a month. And he refused to pay it. The landlady's daughter had a pit bull who killed one of his wife's cats, and they couldn't even complain about that because the whole thing was such a precarious existence. And you could feel that kind of greedy attitude was threatening everything. So I painted the sly fox landlord who, you know, you can't trust, and I don't think the city ever really got over that. Rents never really went back to where they were before.
Well, that was just
down
such a
some.
sham. And there's a lot of empty space that the city doesn't even recognize, all this empty office space. There's space here to be found. It's just you have to
gotta look for
pursue it. And I think that a lot of the work that's that looks fresh here, because a lot of the work that's here is in the show, there's sort of a combination of old work and new work. Most of the artists are dedicated to their work, and they still work, and they're not starving because they've managed to maintain a career or do some sort of, you know, work that makes them have a reasonable lifestyle. Almost everybody's still working. And I think what's really interesting is because of these empty spaces that, well, one of the most interesting projects when the Fillmore was being redeveloped was when those buildings let artists put up pieces in their storefronts for periods of time. There's lots of different ways that people are showing work. And one thing that I feel strongly about galleries, because I am a business person, is galleries have a right to their own opinions. If you're going to open up a gallery and you're going to try to make a go of it, it seems to me that you do have your right to have your stable of artists. So to complain, as I have for many years, that you can't get into that sort of art scene sometimes really isn't where you want to be anyway. And these alternative spaces are great because you can show your work, you can sell your work, it's not a problem, and they're much more interesting. The gallery scene, I mean, it's hard to go in there and not be bored. It's hard work. So
it's not so much the work either, it's the presentation and the salability and the slickness, and so it isn't. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I just was going to say that, you know, one of the names up on the wall here that you're dedicating this show to is Thomas Albright. And I think he was an incredibly important person because he recognized not only the value of an individual artist, but he recognized the value of the contribution of the artist community, and he was comfortable in it. He moved through, you know, he spoke to musicians, he spoke to performing artists, he spoke to visual artists, and he was a critic of such breadth and stature that all of a sudden our scene here had standing because he spoke to it.
Yes.
And we don't have that now.
Well,
what we have now is a critic who speaks only to from those venues that you're speaking of.
Well,
he never comes in rooms like this.
So one has to question the existence of critics. Is it what came first, the critic or the artist? And Albright was no exception. I think that he looked for things that were interesting to write about in his own interests. And he did support the alternative movements in the South Market, very much so, which leads me to David McClay, who should be mentioned here, because it was McClay that started the Open Studios, and McClay who started this kind of voyeurism of the art audience within the studio, something that Albright bought into immediately. He loved it. And he wrote he did a great review on every Open Studio, did many reviews at Bluxom Street.
But the
I
Open
think
Studio
he was
started in the space that's now the Hunan restaurant.
That's right.
Over on Bryant Street.
1975. I saw a banner out front that said Open Studio 30 years right out here on a lamppost.
Yes, last year they celebrated 30 years with, I think, 900 artists participating.
David and Helen McClay started Open Studio in 1975 with 10 locations in the South of Market with one sheet of paper that they went to a copy place and copied and passed out. And it had the locations of that. It somehow got into Albright's hands at the Trieste one morning. He was interested, came, did a great review on all 10 of us, and boom, it was on its way. He gave us our first real
your credibility.
Credibility, yeah. So that not only was that was important, to us as individuals, but it was important to an entire scene, an entire generation, because it did really mean that we didn't need the galleries any longer. We could show right in our own studios, right in a comfortable atmosphere, and it built camaraderie and it built community, which is what the Re-Show is trying to do. This reunion.
Has done. Yes.
I'd just say I wish we had that same kind of critical support for the work that's going around now. The same kind of recognition with a critic of standing, an international critic of standing, would do so much more for the work in San Francisco. We're still stuck in that, you got to go to New York, if you're going to make it. It's a terrible place.
Well, we've always been provincial.
But that's where the Re-Show is so interesting, because if this show can really get its definition broadcast throughout other venues in the United States or Europe, whatever, it is an attempt to define what this art is about. And Thomas Albright is no longer with us, but it is an attempt to show him the respect and to carry on that tradition. And for every intent and purpose, it should work.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think the Re-Show is the beginning.
I do too.
It's not the end. It's just the beginning. There's a big message to be sent out all over the country about artists being able to show in their own studios and artists being relocated out and urbanized out of their areas. So we have a tremendous message.
But also it's defining what this San Francisco art scene has been about, how it's different than many other art scenes, because I'm sure that if you had this grouping in Austin or Santa Fe, you would have some sense of a style from all of this different art that would come to the surface. And that's what I'm thinking, is that there's this sense of what is this art, what does this art represents. It represents San Francisco Bay Area art.
You're absolutely correct on that. Yes, this Re-Show certainly does. Yeah.
It's an indigenous show that really speaks for itself in a good way.
I pulled this, at this point, I pulled this from The Economist. It's got on the web, San Francisco Briefing, August 2006. The San Francisco Yerba Buena Center pays homage this vibrant community of Oakland, sampling Oakland's exhibition of works by Oakland's leading painters, photographers, filmmakers, sculptors, and whatever. This is our Yerba Buena Center has got to go over to Oakland to get a new study of young artists who are on the, coming into the world.
Well, I really think that we've gone full circle in this. One of the great things that happened in the very late 60s that informed the 70s and 80s was a new appreciation of value of culture that people made. Right there. Not that you went to major institutions and consumed. You didn't have to have the imprimatur of the critical establishment reinforced by major institutions putting up and say, here is your cultural product, kneel down and worship.
That was
Jack,
partially.
I need to wrap this okay. segment up, but we'll come back and talk about these very ideas in the next program, in which we want to look ahead a little bit, talk a little bit more about what Flicka was saying, how this is a model for other parts of the country and certainly for other parts of the world. It's been a great pleasure being with you again today. I want to thank our panelists, John, Jack, Brian, Jack, and Flicka, and we hope you will tune in for our next program. Thank you.